Well, welcome to the CrossPoints podcast. And before we go anywhere, Pastor Andy.
This is the Andy and David podcast.
No,
Yes.
No, I was just getting ready to say, how about those Chiefs?
Oh,
Come
yes.
on.
Super Bowl champions.
Who would have thought?
I kind of didn't ever think.
Yeah, let me tell you, fourth quarter, I'm going to be transparent, Andy, with you and the whole world out there. The fourth quarter, I was like, well, I guess we'll have to do this another year.
Yeah, I always had I had faith because I had seen him come back, but
you had more faith
I was
than I
telling
did.
myself in the third quarter, I was working myself up to be like, I'm just going to enjoy the rest of this moment. I'm just going to enjoy the fact we're in the Super Bowl.
It's still the big game.
Yeah. So I was there with you, but at the same time, I was holding out hope.
Yeah. I literally, I was down in the dumps. And I was I really was. And I couldn't believe it because, I'm not a huge sports guy,
you weren't invested.
but I was invested in this whole thing.
Yeah.
And then, oh my gosh, when the tide started turning and when I knew, I don't know what play it was, but when they scored that other touchdown, I was just like, we're gonna win, and my boys were not watching because they could care less.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But I shouted, "We're gonna win!" And they both came running up to me. What are you talking about, Dad? It's pretty funny.
And you said their response was, "Are we gonna have school?"
Yeah, that's exactly right. The next question was, "Are we gonna have school?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Probably not."
Yeah.
And they're not, so it should be fun.
It's all right.
Yeah,
it's all good.
It's great. So, Andy, thank you for being here on the podcast.
Absolutely.
If you don't know, Pastor Andy is our family ministries pastor here at CrossPoints Church. He wears a lot of different hats, not only the Chiefs hats, but he does a lot of things here at the church. And man, I just so appreciate you, Pastor Andy, and all that you do. I really mean that. Like, we've known each other for a long, long time, and I love the perspective that you bring to the team. So
thank you.
It's really
Thank
good. Okay, so you had asked me to watch something. I think it's on Amazon Prime.
Yes, it is. It's a documentary.
A documentary on the Jonas Brothers.
The Jonas Brothers. The Joe Bros.
Hey, and listen, I didn't know anything about I didn't even know who the Joe Bros were until Ora Hayes told me about the Joe Bros, and I was like, who are these guys? I don't even know what you're talking about.
In your defense, you are not a father of teenage girls.
I don't have girls.
Nope.
There's no pink in our house.
Nope. So I had one in particular, teenage daughter. So we knew all about the Jonas Brothers.
Okay.
Didn't go to concerts or anything like that, but I knew about the Jonas Brothers. I watched the TV.
Did you grow up with the Jonas? I mean, your kids grew up with them? Okay.
Yeah, they were Disney, right? Like, you watched the documentary, right? So they were Disney stars.
Right.
So, we were introduced to the Jonas Brothers. And, Disney, so they're clean cut.
Sure.
Right? So we can trust these guys.
Right.
And as you saw in the documentary, and it was just a really big part of the story, is that they grew up in the church.
Which I did not know in the Assembly of God Church.
Yeah.
Really crazy. And they just weren't like church kids. They were pastors' kids. Worship leaders.
In church. Absolutely. Yeah, like the whole 9 yards.
If you have Amazon Prime, I totally encourage you to watch it because it was fascinating.
I think it's a great picture into either the culture that we may be in now to a certain degree, or maybe even what it was 10 years ago, because they really grew up in the church more like 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think that even the church has changed a lot in the last 10 years.
I would agree with that.
And so,
but I think it's a lot of people's history, right?
Absolutely.
They can totally identify with what these guys went through.
Yeah, anywhere from like, if you're 15 years old up, I would say.
Absolutely. So it got me to thinking, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the podcast, it got me to thinking about kids, like elementary, junior high, high school, and how we as the church can help parents like have spiritual conversations with our kids.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I thought, why don't I give you the opportunity to kind of share with our audience kind of what your philosophy of ministry is, and what does that look like? How does that relationship look like to have spiritually healthy kids?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things, you and I talked about this, how the Jonas Brothers, they're not like the deep end as far as like a Miley Cyrus, who kind of grew up in the church and at some point in her early teenage years kind of had this profession of faith, and now she's like as far away from at least an outward Christianity as you can see.
Yeah, it's kind of tragic. Yeah,
it is tragic. The Jonas Brothers aren't that, but you see through this documentary this journey of faith that they're taking and kind of questioning the church and God.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not like really blatant and out there, but you can as a Christian, you pick up on all of these things.
Oh, as
right?
I'm watching the documentary, I'm cringing a little bit because I'm seeing these boys who had such, I think, a positive experience about church and God, and now they're just drifting from their faith.
Right, and I think as a parent, that's the scary thing.
Oh.
Whether your kid is a famous
I'm thinking about my
musician
kids watching this
or
documentary.
just a regular kid, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have kids, and I think most people who are watching this podcast either have young kids or kids who are growing up, and they've grown up in a church environment, right? And so, what is going to keep them in their faith? And that's the thing I think about all the time as a parent is. I want my kids to be successful. I want them to have great jobs. I want them to get
to go to the right schools, get the right jobs, have the right spouses, all of that.
But the most important thing to me, this is for me as a parent, is I want them to have a connection with Jesus.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And so, my philosophy as, both a parent and then also a pastor who oversees the youth and children of CrossPoints Church is that there has to be a marriage between the church and then the family.
Okay, so why don't you take a deeper dive into what that means then?
Yeah, so we use a curriculum here, and it's widely used throughout the church in America. It's called Orange.
Okay.
And the thought is that you have, and I get the colors confused, but the basic idea is that you have the church who's like yellow, and then the family who's red. And if you bring them together, you marry those together, it becomes orange because you need both the church and the family to successfully raise a child.
To be spiritually healthy.
Be spiritually healthy, yeah, absolutely. And so for me, and the reality is, as the church, when I put on my church pastor hat, I know that we have, on average, 2 to 3 hours a month with a kid.
Okay, let that sink in just for a second for our viewers. You're saying there's spiritual education and
when it
formation.
comes to the church,
when it comes to
our
that's
input
exactly.
into the life of a child, we have, because we get about an hour a week. If they come every week, and we know most families, they don't come every week. There's soccer games, there's vacations,
incredibly busy,
very busy. So we know that about 2 to 3 weeks out of the month, we're gonna get a child. So that means we get 2 to 3 hours a month to pour into the life of a child. Now, and let's think about, there's the teenagers, right? So we have also Wednesday night. So maybe our teenagers, they get 6 to 7 hours, but still that's 6 or 7 hours, right?
In very formative years,
right? Which is important. But then the reality is, as a parent, now I put on my parent hat, right?
Now, so stop just for a second. Tell everybody the ages of your kids, because I think that will help them as well.
So I have 4 kids. So I have a 20-year-old daughter. Who's a sophomore in college. Then I have a 17-year-old daughter who's a senior in high school. A 15-year-old son. I got to remember, they all having birthdays. 15-year-old son, freshman in high school. And then my youngest is 12. He turns 12 in just a couple days. And he's a 6th grader.
Wow. So you have an elementary student and high school students and a college students. And for all intents and purposes, next year you're going to have a junior high student. So you kind of run the gamut.
That's right. And so and actually last year was a really weird year for us. We had college, high school, middle school, elementary.
You had it all.
All in one year. Wow. First and only year that would happen.
Insane, right? Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted our audience to know, like, hey, you've had the experience. You are in the middle of it right now.
Yeah, and the reality as a parent, when I put on my parenting hat, I see that I have way more influence on a day in, day out, hourly basis. I put in, what do I get? Probably 2 to 3 hours a day, at least with my kids.
Exactly.
If I'm around, and
and more on the weekends too.
And for me, it's a lot of it's driving back and forth to activities. It's being in the car. It's I coach one of my youngest son. I coach his team, so I get a little more time with him. But I have the most outside of school. I guess probably school. My kids' teachers have the most influence, or maybe their school friends. But for me, I have more influence on the spiritual formation of my child than when I have put on my pastor hat.
So you're trying to say, listen, it's the church's role and the parents' role combined that are really going to drive our children becoming spiritually healthy.
That's right.
And so we need to recognize that there's a partnership that takes place between these two.
Yeah, because here's the reality. If you are as a parent, or me as a parent, if I have the perspective of I'm just going to send my kids to church and they're going to get everything that they need from a spiritual formation standpoint, they're going to get something and it's going to be good. But the reality is, I as a parent, I'm the most influential
Right.
person in their life when it comes to building their spiritual life.
Right. So we're not just dropping kids off and saying, well, okay, I've taken them to church, check the box,
Right.
they're going to be all good.
Right.
That's just not reality.
No, it's not reality.
Yeah.
And I think if we take a step back and just think about it logically, it makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
We know that as parents, it's about everything else in life, right?
Yep.
If we want them to be formed in some shape,
In
right,
any
it's best.
endeavor, right?
Yeah.
Sports or school or academic, whatever it is.
Playing an instrument, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So let's put your parent hat on right now. Instead of talking about the church, so we're talking to our audience, grandparents and parents and everybody in between. How can we become intentional with some of our conversations? That's one question. But I wanted to talk about sometimes it's awkward.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
I'm a lead pastor of a church. I've been in ministry over almost 30 years, and sometimes having spiritual conversation with your kids is awkward. I don't know if you have.
Absolutely.
You have any experience? Yeah.
Well, for sure. And I'll talk about this in the intentionality part.
Okay.
But it seems like most of our spiritual conversations for our family happen in the car.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand.
Yes.
It's weird, but it's so true.
Yeah, and so it's that driving back and forth, that dead time where you don't. At least at this, especially my youngest son, he doesn't have devices really that he's plugged into.
So
at
his
this point.
brain is thinking.
So he's thinking.
Yeah.
And he's by far my deepest thinker.
Okay.
And so he will come up with some deep theological questions, like about the rapture, and like one of my questions is like, where do you even come up with?
Yeah,
this
like
stuff? How do you know?
How is that hitting your brain?
Yeah. And so he'll ask these really tough questions, and I think the awkwardness is, I don't know.
Okay, hold it, full stop just for a second. But Andy, you've been a pastor for so long. Surely you know all the Bible answers. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek because I think parents get really awkward. This is what I've heard.
Yeah.
Parents are awkward to talk about spiritual things because they don't feel like they know, and they're petrified to have their kids ask something and then they don't really know how to answer the conversation. So they don't engage in that conversation because they're afraid they don't know themselves.
Yeah.
So how do you answer that?
Well, I think there's two things.
Okay.
One is, well, I don't know. Here's a thought. Maybe it's this or that, right? And just start kind of talking it out loud and just allowing for the conversation to go. And I think maybe, I'm trying to think of an example, like, what's heaven going to be like?
Right. Okay. Great.
Well, I don't really know. I mean, I've heard that there's streets of gold, but that sounds weird to me. Like, I don't know about streets of gold. Like,
do I need
is
streets
it literal
of gold?
or is it euphemism? And so, like, I think of heaven as being this place that I want to be, and so that's open, free, and I'm going to run fast, and so I start but then say, I don't know. What do you think? Right? What do you think it is? And then let them respond to that, because they probably are going to have a different perspective, either the same or different.
Right.
Right. And so in this back and forth, because really that's what theological questions are all about, right?
Yes.
It's we don't really know. There are things that we hold as these are truths about who God is.
Yep.
But a lot of it is we don't know. It's this openness and this.
Well, that's what faith is all about at the end of the day, right? It's a world that we can't see.
Yeah.
But yet it's this world that we can't see that's formed the things that we do see. It's this back and forth. I'm sorry, I'm going off on the theology, but the idea is with our kids to not shy away from those conversations because you think it's going to be awkward.
And not to be afraid to say, I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And a lot of, I would say 75% of my responses in the end is, we'll talk about it. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, I was just literally having a conversation with one of my sons the other day, and asking me again a theological question, and I was just like, "Buddy, I don't know." And anybody that tells you that they know, don't listen to them, because it's just not clear. Some things we want them to be so clear in Scripture, but they're just not.
Right.
And we have to be okay with that ambiguity.
Yeah.
And I think, especially as conservative Christians, right, we want the black and white. We want the box. It makes us feel comfortable. But really, faith says that we have to hold open hands that say it's okay to have the ambiguity to say, I don't know, God knows, and I trust him anyway.
Yes.
And we have to do that with our kids.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And And I think the hard thing, the younger the child, the less they're able to hold an ethereal thought.
Yeah.
They want it to be very concrete. Right. And so that's when I think when they're younger, you try to come up with some concrete answers.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
And I don't have a great example for it because it just is different depending on the question.
Sure.
But I think if you can give examples that have a concrete picture in their head of, well, Jesus is like, okay, this is an easy example, right? The triune God. Well,
right, yeah. Like, well, talk to me about Trinity. Okay,
yeah, it's the Trinity. Okay, well, I don't understand. In church, they said that Jesus is the Father, there's the Father, and then there's the Son and the Holy Spirit, but they're all God. I don't understand how that works. Right. And, the example of that is, well, there's ice, or water, right? And it comes in different forms. It comes in the liquid form, it comes in the solid form, it comes in the gas form. And those are all the same, but they're all different at the same time.
Right.
And so if we can have a concrete picture sometimes, and sometimes, again, it's I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. But the more concrete we can make it for the child, and the more black and white we can make it.
It's important.
Right. It is important. And so part of that is on, as a parent, and this is what a lot of times I tell our parents is, as a parent, it's really important for me to just be daily reading Scripture and knowing Scripture and understanding the Bible and also being aware to say, I don't understand, I don't know, I need to go find, I need to research this. Yeah. But if we're at least doing our part to become spiritually, to grow spiritually, it helps us to answer some of those questions for our kids.
That's really good. And I think to tack on to that, to what you're saying, it's okay to say you don't know. And the day and age that we live, man, with Google and the internet and all that, man, do some research and then follow back up with your kids or talk to a pastor or whatever.
And sometimes we're afraid because we think, well, the internet, how are we going to know what's on the? And it could be anything. It could be really, it could be really liberal.
This is true.
And it's really true. But in general, usually if you look up a question, a biblical question on the internet, it's just going to be kind of fact based.
It's right? It's true.
And so don't worry about it too much. Here's where we begin, and then when you start diving in deep, then you're going to find some really weird stuff, some really good stuff, some really really strange aliens, and
aliens. Who would ever talk about aliens? I believe in aliens, but that's another point. Okay, so we've talked about the awkward conversations that I think almost all parents are either going to feel themselves or their kids are going to ask something. But now let's shift from just those momentary questions that come and hit us in the car, those things that I think are important or that they just kind of flow naturally, to now let's be intentional. How have you, as a parent and a pastor, how have you been intentional with your kids to grow spiritually healthy kids?
Well, I think one thing, going back to the car example, because sometimes me as a parent, and I've had a busy day, and I've got to take my kid to whatever practice, whatever activity, I want to just zone out in the car, right? I want to listen to music.
2 hands up,
I want to listen to the talk radio. I want to listen to my podcast, and here comes the question. Right. And I sometimes I'm really good at this, and sometimes I'm really bad, but if I can be intentional, turning the radio down, and then engaging in that conversation. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to do, right? Is to just enter into the conversation. So that, to me, even though that's that's really important for that intentionality to actually engage in that conversation.
So you're saying engage, don't shy away from that. When those moments come, strike them, because they're always going to come at inopportune times. This is what I have found, right? My kids are going to ask stuff and I'm not in the mood, I'm too tired, I'm busy, I've got other things on my mind. But man, we got to recognize that as parents, this is an opportunity that's on their heart. We got to strike while the iron's hot.
It's true. Yeah. I think the other thing to do, and this is really about more relational type things, I think mealtime is really important.
Okay, so let's talk about that because it's huge.
Yeah, and so again, we have 4 kids. We're a really busy family, and so we probably truly sit down and have mealtime 2 to 3 times a week.
And I think that's probably average for that's about what we do too.
Yeah, and so, but I think it's important to at least to say, here are the 2 or 3. We're looking at our weekly schedule, right? And we know that we have activities, but here's 2 or 3 days where we can sit down and we can have a meal together. Yeah. And we make them put the phones down.
Good.
We have to put our own phones down.
So you take. Hold on, I'm going to pull out my phone. So what do? You make them put it in the middle of the thing, or you just say no? You just take it out.
Yeah. If we see the phone come out, we're like, hey, no phones.
Put that down.
And listen, it's sometimes they say, hey, no phones, right?
I love my kids do the same thing. I'm sneaking my phone, doing some email. They're like, Dad, stop that. I know. It's true.
So I think just having that time, even if it's not a spiritual conversation, it's just relational.
We're unplugging.
Yes, we're unplugging. plugging. And then the other thing, and this is just a really strange thing, is just chore time, right? And so chores, like for us, one of the chores that we do is every night we have them, clean. If we make, our deal is you either make the meal or you clean up from the meal.
We're the same way. Okay,
right?
That's
so
good. All right.
Most of the times the kids are cleaning up the meal.
Totally.
And a lot of times conversations happen around there. Just the other night I had a really great conversation. It wasn't even a theological question or a conversation, but it was just a really great conversation with my son, as he was just him and I was sitting at the table. I was actually on my phone just kind of piddling around, but I was engaged with him, and he was talking to me because he had nothing else to do, right? He's washing the dishes. Nobody else is around. And so, and he's a quality time person. Right. That's how he shows his love. And so I was sitting there and we were just having a conversation, and he was asking some hard questions, like things that he was walking through in his life. And like, friendship type things. But just me being there. Right?
That's good. That's really good. So, anything else you've done intentionally over the course of your kind of family? And I know, you've got a daughter who's 20 right now, but talk about family devotions or anything along those lines. What have you done through the years? Anything that kind of sticks out to you that's like, man, this is how has that worked for you?
So just really honestly, we are not the great family devotion family. That's just not who we've been. I think that church is, because I have been not a pastor, and I've been a pastor.
Right, you've worked on both sides,
Right, and so having a family, and so church for us has been really important, and having a consistency of, we go to church on Sundays, pretty much weekly, right? And there are times we don't. One of the things that when my kids were younger, and two of my boys, one of my oldest son is a really good soccer player. Plays on a really high division team.
Right.
And we made a commitment to we just basically told him, and then we had to have the hard conversations with coaches, is that, hey, Sunday games, if it's before noon, we won't be there.
Right.
And
you drew a line in the sand.
We drew a line in the sand, especially at that time, our church only had one service, and so that made it difficult to try to navigate those things. So just I think my kids seeing that we have standards and we have church is really important. It just spoke something to them.
You're training your kids that church is a priority.
And
I don't want to blow. I don't want to. No, I know, but I don't want to blow past this too often, because I wish more parents would do this. And again, I know it's not church; it's their spiritual formation, their spiritual lives. This is important, and then it supersedes a lot of other.
And then
things.
I think it goes back to that concrete idea, right? Because it's hard for me as a kid to understand that that's God.
Right.
And though church isn't God, it's a representative of who God is,
good.
And so we're saying God is more important than soccer or basketball or cheerleading or whatever the activity is, right?
So we're going to say no to those things, because this time is a priority.
This is a sacred time for us. And so we are going to do these things, and that's going to whatever the activity is going to take a back seat.
That's great. That's great. I'll kind of share a couple of things that I've done over the years too, and I would say the same thing. We're not a hugely great devotional family either. We've done things; they've been kind of sporadic. But again, whether I've been the lead pastor, an associate pastor, or when I was in seminary, we made church a priority. Like, we were there every week, unless there's some extenuating circumstance or we're on vacation or whatever. Right. Even on vacation, I make my kids go to church.
You're more hardcore than we are.
I probably so.
Now I have done this. I've done this. We were in Colorado, and we went up to the mountain and had church on the mountain. It was really good for me. I think my kids did not really enjoy it that much, but
yeah, that's fine. But my point is the same with you, that as parents, we have to take the lead to say that church is important and that we're going to be there. And the reason why we say it's important is because it is the time when we're forming our spiritual life. And if our kids know that it's not important to us, then it's not going to become important to them.
Yeah.
And so if you want your kids to really love God, love Jesus, and love the church, which I think really are together, like, we're supposed to not just love God himself, but we're to love community. We're called to that community. The church is his body, his bride, and so we need to love that as well. Make that a priority. Anyway. All that to say, when my kids were younger, I remember this. The first 10 years of my boys' life, my wife and I would both separately, every night before they went to bed, we laid hands on them and we prayed for them. I'm almost without fail every single night. And that put within them this importance of prayer, of seeking God, that he comes first. Then when they got a little bit older, we kind of shifted kind of what we did. And I started doing like conversations at the meal, at the dinner table.
Okay.
Where we would go through all the major stories of the Bible.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would talk to them, and we started in Genesis, and we just went through it, and just, we talked about Adam and Eve and what does that mean? And man, the questions that they can come up with.
It's true.
And as the lead pastor, I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. Good guess. You have to ask God when you get there.
Well, that's really interesting. So think about this,
go
though,
ahead.
if I'm a parent who I don't really know the Bible very well.
Yeah, right.
So how would you suggest for someone to do that?
Yeah, it would be very easy to go online on Google, seriously, and type in major stories of the Bible.
Okay.
And I think there's like 52 or something like that, major stories, and take those by, and it would take you 5 minutes to read that. And we didn't do it every night.
Right.
We would do it maybe once a week or a couple of times a week. And if you just know the core of the story, that's huge.
Yeah.
Just to say that God created an Adam and Eve out of the mud. Did you know that? That we're formed from dust,
Yeah.
and that we're going to return to him. I mean, that's really simple, right?
Yeah.
Here's Noah. All the people on earth were totally unrighteous and ungodly, and God had to come, and he loved the world, but it was so sinful. Just those kind of things. You can take just a few minutes, and it would be so practical, and it would open up a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I think if your kids are a little bit younger too, maybe 6, 7, 8, you could do that with the Bible app, because they have the kids' Bible app.
It's great.
Right, and it's still kind of the same thing where they just go through mainly the major stories. It doesn't go verse by verse, and so you could do the same idea.
And I think I would tell parents, I think there's this tension, like we have to do it every day, and we have to be in it and consistent, and then when we're not, we get guilty as parents that we're not leading them right, we're not doing it right. And I think the idea is if you could just have that thread through your family, through the life, that we're going to be doing this in different seasons, it's okay.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to have to do it every single time. It's okay.
I think there's also something about modeling, right?
Yes, right.
I remember my mom, me waking up and going downstairs, and when I was really young, my mom lived, we had a 2-bedroom apartment, and she lived in the living room and would have a fold-out couch. And so I would go downstairs in the morning, and she would be reading her Bible. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And those memories in that day, I mean, every day if I were to do it. Yeah. Some mornings she was up too early, but I think that just put in my head the importance of that.
You're almost 50 years old, Andy.
I'm 46. I'm closer to 45 than 50.
I keep saying that. But the point is that you still have that memory in your head. Like that was very formative for you. Yeah. The latest thing that we started doing, because now my boys are older, right? They're getting ready to go into 9th grade next year, and I'm super excited about that for them. And so I was trying to change things up. Yeah. We've started watching, I don't know if you remember the Bible series that came out several years ago in 2013.
Yes.
And they took all the major stories of the Bible, and it's on Amazon Prime if you're a Prime member, and they're videos, and I think there's like 13 of them. Well, we're working our way through that, and so it's family time. Yeah. So they don't have an option. We're going to watch, and so we're just going through it, and it sparks. So one of my sons loves to ask questions. Every 5 minutes, Dad, pause it. Dad, pause it. I got to go. And the other son is like, can we just watch stuff? Whatever. But, taking things, excuse me, that are interesting to your own kids helps them, so it's not a drag, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the philosophy, we've talked about the awkwardness and the intentionality. What other tips that you might have with your parents before we wrap things up here?
Yeah, the last thing I would say, and this is something I tell parents all the time, and I have to remind them sometimes, and when I remind them, it actually, people do something about it, but there's something about community. Right? And if I want my kid to enjoy church, and again, it's that concrete thing, if I can associate God with something positive, and so building friendships. Yeah. And that's where consistency really matters. Yeah. If I'm at church, and I'll take it a step further, I'm a part of a small group, a connect group. Okay. And there's other kids there, and I'm building those relationships. Yeah. Then when I show up to church, I enjoy church. Again, I begin to associate church with my friends. I associate God with my friends, and it's this positive experience. So good. Right? And the hard thing is it's really tough to do if there's not a consistency. Right. And so the more consistent
How can you get to know people and develop friendships if you're only around once a month?
Right.
You can't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always a drag if you're a kid and you're walking in as an outsider.
Yeah. Man, that's really
And we
really
do
good.
our best as a kids ministry to engage and to draw in and to, and we do a great job. I feel like we have some great, incredible teachers here in our kids ministry, and Pastor Nick does a great job of engaging with our youth ministry. But it's just difficult if it's just once a month or once every few weeks.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, that's a great place to end it because I think at the end of the day, we're trying to build community here at CrossPoints Church.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage you to lean into that. And it's only going to create spiritual fruit, not only for your life, but for the life of your family as well. So, Pastor Andy, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, it was great to be on here.
Yeah.
Someday you'll get Aura back.
One of these days, we'll get Aura to come back. Hey, just as a matter of reminder, please smash that subscribe button. And don't forget to like us and share as well. If you know some parents that could use some tips like this, feel free to share that with them as well. And we'll see you next week.